I'm so glad you're here again for the second public workshop of the McKissack Beach and Marsh Management Plan. And we tend, as we just discussed in the steering committee, we tend to forget about the marsh part. There's 219 acres of the marsh and 42 acres of the beach area. And I'm sure most of the discussion tonight will concentrate on the beach, but remember we have the marsh. And do the best you can. Provide your input. We have Mr. Tom Taylor and Mr. Josh Adams from the Apalachee Regional Planning Council, and they're putting together the land development plan that's funded by the FDEP. So, go forward, sirs.
Okay, well, I'll add my welcome to you all. I'm sure there's lots of other things you could be doing, and I'm glad that you've chosen to be here. And I'll just say that our agenda, for our meeting tonight is basically Josh is going to provide some overview of what the planning process is and where we are in that. We're going to take a look at sections of the land management plan, and we listened to what you had to say last time, and Josh has made some changes. We'll take a look at those changes and maybe make some more, but our goal is to try to figure out what makes sense. And we've got some kind of meeting guidelines, and that's, we live in Tallahassee. You guys know this beach better than we do. And so, and everybody knows it perhaps from a different way and a different kind of history of it. And so everybody's got a piece of the truth, but nobody's got all the truth. And so this is our opportunity to hear that truth and figure out what to do about it. We could listen to anybody here all night and be fascinated. But there's a lot of people here and a lot of material we have to cover. So it's important for us to kind of keep focused. It doesn't mean to be quiet. If you've got a question, if somebody says something and you don't understand, ask, what do you mean? Clarify those assumptions. That's an important part of this. And there's some concerns, but we also need to find solutions. We're trying to do a plan for what's going to make sense for the future for this area. And there's times that there may be differing points of view, and it's important to acknowledge those and understand why people are feeling that way or why they think what they think. And so to the degree we can find a way to get consensus and agree on things, that's good, but we can also agree to disagree. And I'm going to be taking notes, and so if you can kind of follow what's going up here, and if I don't get it right, correct me. Got to get the notes right, because Josh is going to use the notes to make any further revisions in this. And I'll just say, it's my understanding that some folks are here because of a recent incident involving a dog. And so that's important. People care about it. And what we want to do is take at the most 15 minutes and kind of hear those concerns, and we'll list those. We're going to, everybody doesn't have to say, their point of view, but we need to get all the point of views down. And so I'm going to try to capture those perspectives. The chief is here. If there's a question from the law enforcement point of view, he made the point he's not the lawyer here. He can't decide that, but he can talk about what the laws are and the enforcement implications of these things. So if it's okay with you, let's go ahead, and I've just called this dog incident concerns. And so what I'd like to get from you all is, what are your concerns about this?
Could somebody give us the story of what really happened? Some of us have heard about it on Facebook, some of us have heard it from friends. I would just like to hear what really happened.
Yeah, have the chief tell us what happened.
Okay? Who's got the answer to that? Chief?
Mr. Smith, the dog owner, was on a walk with his dog on the beach. I believe it started out with the dog being on a leash. At some point he decided nobody was on the beach, nobody was around, and he had taken the dog off the leash. They were walking back west, back towards the vehicle, when the other Mr. Smith comes from an access trail down to the beach and starts walking in their direction. Mr. Smith, the dog owner, his dog starts to run towards the other Mr. Smith. He's yelling for his dog to stop. The dog continues running, gets within 4 feet of Mr. Smith. According to Mr. Smith that was attacked and shot the dog, he says the dog lunges at him. He's growling and barking as he's coming towards him. Mr. Smith sidesteps the dog goes past him, whips around, starts to get him again. At that point he draws his firearm and fires one shot, hitting the dog.
How large was this dog?
Ma'am?
What kind of dog are we talking about?
It's a mixed breed dog. We're talking
Good
a
sized
dog
dog?
around 50 to 55 pounds, is what the report says. Mr. Smith that fired the shot, he has a concealed weapons permit. He's within his rights to carry that weapon on the beach. The dog should have been on a leash, although it wasn't. It's a very unfortunate incident. It happened the way it did, but you know, it could have been a lot worse.
Okay, so that's the basic fact.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
One question I have is, a lot of us have always taken our dogs to the beach. It says on our website it's dog-friendly beaches. A lot of people have never put their dogs on a leash at the old beach. Like everybody knows, the dogs just run in the beach there and they take them home. Is there gonna be a sign up that says dogs must be put on a leash there so this won't happen again? I certainly don't.
There's already a sign there. There's been a sign there that says a long time. It also says clean up out of yourself, and they don't clean up after themselves.
It is
I
a
think
Franklin
the problem
County
is-
ordinance.
one
Right, but
person
it's
at a
at
time.
the big beach, but I haven't seen it at the old beach.
Okay.
There's one.
Okay, let me get, okay, there's a history of not using leashes. Will there be a sign, is your question? There is a sign, right? Okay, and what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna recognize a couple, as many hands as I see, and then we'll take those and then we'll see if there's other hands. So here and then behind you. No, the lady in front of you.
I think there is an issue. If you Google Franklin County's leash law, there's ordinance 420 that immediately pops up that lists direct control as voice control being appropriate. Now, if you do some digging, you can find out that that's actually not the law. The law here is that direct control means a direct leash. But if there's any way to change that to not be the first thing people see when they look up the law here, that might be, I mean, if we're going to advertise as being dog friendly and that's the first thing people see when they Google Carrabelle Beach, that's a problem. Because a lot of people don't pay attention to the signs, they Google and research the beach online, so.
So the question is, can that be clarified?
Can that be clarified or changed? I don't know who's in charge of that, but it is the first hit on Google. Ordinance 420 recognized from 2015, which has obviously been updated, but the updated law doesn't come up first.
Okay. Boy, how do you go in and change Google? You know, that's a tough
You
one.
can,
Yeah.
you have to ask, you have
Yeah.
to provide the correct information.
Yes, sir.
I'd like to ask the chief what his interpretation of the beach leash law is.
according to our, ordinance, it says that the dog must be on a leash.
Gotcha, thank you.
I'll tell you how far does that leash law go?
It don't specify.
When they go
as
in the
long as-
water, you gonna run
Oh.
in behind him?
Well, that's something we
They
talked
like
about
to play
earlier.
ball, they like to fetch sticks.
I understand.
So, you gotta have something right there that goes both ways. If your dog wants to play in the water, you can't keep him on a leash or a long rope.
We're
I
working on
understand.
that. We are working on that, on the water part.
Carry over at the beach, and also got to sit with it for a bit, so I'm on both sides of this thing. But, my dog will take her to the beach, she's on a leash, I get to the water, I turn loose, I go in the water, she comes out of the water, or if anybody approaches, she's on the leash. And I think that makes more sense than saying you gotta loose while you're throwing the ball for it.
And I'd like to add one more thing. Since this has happened, it's come to our attention that some of the people down there see dogs out there and not on the leash. They approach the owners themselves. They don't need to do that. The right thing to do is call us and let us get involved in it.
I agree with that. But someone look at it and say, listen.
Yes.
The leash law goes from McKissack Beach, it goes to the new Carrabelle Beach. Does it go further than that? Is it the whole beach that the dogs are supposed to be on a leash?
The signs
Because sometimes you see them here, sometimes you see them here. I mean, I just, for my own benefit, would like to know.
Yeah. Does somebody have an answer?
It said it was legally had to be direct control by a leash when you look up the new Franklin County law.
So
Now,
that would
that
be all
seems to have
beaches.
been changed. It seems as though a few years ago, there was the understanding that direct control could be interpreted as voice control, even if it wasn't an area like, you know, police commanded dog. But as far as the internet is concerned, it looks like that law was changed from 2015 to now. I don't know the history of that ordinance in Carrabelle. I'm sure the officer probably does.
But it's the whole beach as far as you can see. Like, if
Yeah.
you walk out on Carrabelle Beach, I can see the point and I can see people's houses. That whole beach is considered
It's the
leash
entire
law.
county. It's the entire
It's
county.
not
Okay.
just the beach, it's every area on the county.
Yeah.
Okay.
Is that accurate, Chief?
I believe so.
Okay, back in the back there, yes.
I can explain voice control, because the City of Carrabelle has recently worked on amending its animal control ordinance to mirror the county's animal control ordinance, and we studied the voice control part in detail. And voice control is whenever you are training your animal, if it's in an area where exercises are being done, you're under formal training, and there may be other animals there, say you're training for a show or something, or if your animal is in the process of doing canine services, working for law enforcement, then that is whenever it's acceptable for an animal to be under voice control. Otherwise, the Franklin County ordinance, and as Carrabelle's ordinance will say, once we have had our second reading and it's approved, that the animal must be under direct leash control. And for Franklin County, that is for the entirety of Franklin County, all of their beaches. And for Carrabelle, that will be for the entirety of Carrabelle, all of the public spaces.
Okay, yes.
I've lived here since 2001. I've always felt safe on the beach. But in late October, I was fiercely attacked by a white dog down there. I had something in my hand, but that dog was fierce, and the owner was about a half-mile away, out of earshot. So, I now carry a pistol, but I feel it's necessary because that dog was vicious. And if anyone's ever been attacked by a dog, you know what it's like to have a dog attack you.
I carry pepper spray.
Same pepper spray also.
I don't want a gun on the beach.
Right.
Well, stay off the beach.
He's
There was
always
a hand
that
back there, but go ahead.
We're all talking about how dogs attack you on the beach, but there is a simple solution, is have a designated dog beach. So people can do it, because people are gonna do it, whether you tell them they can or can't. So, you know, it's like, we all want to use the beach. There's a lot of dog lovers. I mean, we're full of RV parks. How many people do you know that RV without a dog? So it's about 10%. I was RVing for 9 months. 10% of the people I met didn't have a dog. They had a cat maybe, but they didn't have a dog. So they go places where it's dog friendly. So, you know, if we don't want dogs running on the beach where we're walking, then have a designated area where you can let your dog off a leash. You can walk your dog on a leash.
I think most people agree with that.
Yes,
A lot of
absolutely.
people agree with that.
So it's not like, you don't have to fence it in. You can say from here to here, dogs off leash. From here to here, dogs on leash.
There's a
That
lot of
makes
foreign
sense.
beaches that are formed better like
Dogs
that.
that have gone away from its owner.
Right, but then you have
That's
the right
the
to
owner
protect
that's at
Yeah, but
fault.
then you have the right to protect yourself. If the
I
dog
don't
is
want to have to carry a pistol. I don't want to shoot a
But
dog.
people are gonna do it anyway, whether you have, but if you have a constructive area where these people can go with their dog,
Isn't
most
there a
people are
dog
gonna
park
Okay, so
over in
we've got,
Apalachee?
I'm gonna move into solutions, that's an example of a solution.
I
So,
think a big solution will be when the owner of the dog is not responsible for the dog, they should be fined, like anything else you do. You speed, you're not go in the right velocity while you drive, if you get caught, you get fined. And I think that might be one of the things that the officers are gonna have to start doing. Once a couple of people start getting a fine for $100, $200, nobody likes that. And so that might be something that gives people an idea, I'm gonna take care of my pet, because a dog is like a child. It's never gonna grow up, you have to take care of it, and then there are many irresponsible owners. They just want a dog while it's a puppy, or just a dog to keep me safe and attack somebody and this and that. They don't want a pet, because if you want a pet, you have to take care of it, and it's a 24/7 dealing with it, with any type of animal that you have as a pet.
but most of the people in this county, in this town, are visitors.
Well, but
And they're gonna
visitors,
be here for 5 minutes. Who's gonna-
visitor has to have responsibility. You travel the world, you follow the rules. It's what it is. Anywhere you go in the world.
But it's not.
so I'm capturing solutions now. And so one is to have a dog beach. The second is to hold owners responsible and issue fines. Any other solutions to this situation? I have a hand over here that hasn't spoken. You haven't spoken yet, so you go next.
No, I very often drive through Carrabelle. We live here and we have 11 properties here, and I very often drive through town and see big empty spaces and go, wouldn't that make a great dog park? You know, if we had a nice dog park where dogs could socialize and run free and owners could sit, you know, on a bench, that would be awesome. That would be a draw for us.
I think dog people want a dog beach.
Yeah.
They want
Oh,
an
absolutely.
area. I'm just saying, I think that's the argument though, and probably
So-
what needs to be.
Excuse me,
Yeah,
this lady was next.
sorry.
The lady is right, that we have a lot of tourists and RV parks, but there's nothing saying we can't make the RV parks remind people dogs have to be on a leash.
Right.
The RV parks don't get to let people come and stay without telling them or giving them guidelines. Everybody needs to know the guidelines, but they come for 5 minutes, okay. Your 5 minutes means your dog does not get to run here. Our beaches are not just open beaches where nothing else is happening. They have bird nesting going on, they have turtles coming in. I love dogs to death, but I like walking on the beach and I don't like worrying about what I'm gonna step in or who's gonna run up and get me. So as much as I love dogs being at the beach, they need to be under control, and they're not.
Yeah, dirty
Sorry,
dogs.
but I've walked on the beach since November and I've always picked up mine and I've never
Well,
found
you're one of those people that is caring and you are responsible.
I've stepped in it on the beach, so
Okay,
it's not
ho. I have a hand back here. I'm capturing here that this is a safety issue for people and birds.
My main concern is firearms on the beach. I would like to have something that states that no firearms are allowed on the beach. It's a public beach protecting children and bystanders. I don't think that it's reasonable or smart to have someone on the beach that has a weapon. You can carry pepper spray or bear spray, but I don't think guns should be allowed on the beach. That's my main concern.
Can't do it
I'm capturing these things. This is a meeting about the McKissack Beach and Marsh Land Management Plan. What the leash laws are going to be and how they're enforced and whether there's fines, whether guns are allowed or not allowed, is not going to be in the plan. That's something to take up with your city and county officials and state laws, and if you try to do some of these things, you'll probably wind up in court, and so the court gets, but that's not what we need to do in this meeting. So I think we kind of heard that there's some real concerns here. I think we've got several ideas that can be explored outside of the land management plan, and so I encourage you to continue your advocacy for whatever it is that you prefer. So, is everybody okay to move on now to the plan?
Yeah.
Please.
Yes.
Okay. Well, I know some people didn't come to talk about that, so we do need to get on. So, what I'd like to do now is, I think, does everybody have a copy of the kind of plan that you can either share or have your own copy?
Who does not have mine? Because I did make some printout.
Just tell her to move over 2 seats. I texted her.
Sir, real quick, there's a question here.
I'm just getting ready to go, but I just, in hearing this, and maybe there's other meetings, but everybody's really concerned about dogs on a leash, but no one's concerned about, like, enforcing trash that people leave behind and all over the streets and all over that they're dumping. Are there gonna be meetings about that?
About the dog, the dumping?
Yeah, just, no, about trash, people
Trash.
littering and trash everywhere.
Yeah, part of what we're gonna be talking about in terms of the beach management plan is, you know, who's responsible for kind of litter and policing and environmental problems and so forth. So we're gonna be talking about that tonight.
So that'll be tonight too?
Yeah.
Just
Only on the beach.
City of Carrabelle.
Right, so maybe this would be a good time to introduce the boundary of the area that we're talking about. So this isn't a meeting to discuss Carrabelle in general. We're really looking at this image up here, this map. The area outlined in red is McKissack Beach and Marsh. So we say McKissack Beach a lot because that's the area that most people use. It's about 42 acres. You can see the western boundary is about where Carrabelle Beach is, the area that has the pavilions. And it goes to this point over here. And then about 220 acres or so is Black Needle Rush Marsh. So There's not much management activities that we're able to do to marsh. Some of those would include, though, limited burning for the marsh to restore some habitat and provide opportunities for marsh birds. So we're really, though, focused on the area that most folks are going to be able to access, and that's McKissack Beach itself. So when we are talking in this meeting about things that we want to see done, or if we have constructive ideas on how we might be able to implement solutions, we're talking about this area. We're not talking about Franklin County in general or the city of Carrabelle. This is the area that we need to confine our thoughts to.
Who would do the burning?
We've spoken with the Florida Forest Service, and they would be the ones to implement a burning schedule.
And how often?
That's undetermined right now. For marsh, less of an interval than you might for like a longleaf forest, for instance.
And part of the plan, and we had a meeting before this, and the gentleman back here is with the Forest Service, Florida Forest Service, and he's going to be preparing some guidelines to go into the plan. So the next version you see will have all information.
So are you ready for some questions about this?
Okay, just before we get off the map, here's Golf Beach Drive, and this is the parking area. And so one of the areas that we're going to be talking about is, what happens, in this parking area.
That's right.
And then this is all private land, but out here at the point, where you may be talking about putting up boundary markers, just so people know whether they're on the Watkins land or on the state land. Enforcement officers know whether somebody's on private land or on the public land. And the same goes with the houses along here, where is the boundary, for mowing, and there will be markers there just so everybody's clear on what's the state land and not, is one of the proposals that will go into the plan. Any other questions about the map before we go off of the map? Okay. Yeah.
It appears down at the easternmost end of what we're calling McKissack Beach, that 40-something acres. Does it not, the boundary does not go to the water? It appears that way.
So this was probably generated on images that water more or less would have been mean high where you see the boundary. It's just not been updated, and okay. I didn't think that I should change DEP data. So we've just been using this GIS shapefile provided by the DEP.
Because one of my questions, I think it says in here that it's one of the few areas that's accreting. As it accretes, that accreted part is essentially public land.
Yes, ma'am, that's my understanding. If it was below mean high water at some time, now it's beyond that, it's still considered land of the state and would be considered public land.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
So if we go down 98 further, they're losing land. And losing the road now and then. But here, fortunately, it's actually expanding the area. Okay, good question. Okay, so if you look at the agenda here, we've kind of divided this into some different parts. There's some general information about the area. There's the kind of natural and cultural resources that are here. Then there's the management activities, and particularly the management goals. And Joss is going to talk about the changes in the first one, and then we'll get comments on that, and then we'll go to the next one. So that's how we'll proceed through that. So, and feel free to raise your questions in the appropriate areas. So Josh, you want to tell us a little bit about
Yeah, and I won't go through it line by line. So in general, we had met a few times, some individual meetings, one-on-ones with property owners and Audubon. And out of those meetings came kind of the meat to the plan. After that, we received some comments, and they were generally limited to keeping the status quo of the property, maintaining the integrity of how it is now. Folks didn't want to see boardwalks throughout the property, no restrooms, so really minimum improvements. Every now and then, there might have been a species I left out, red knot, I added that. From one of our steering committee members, Caitlin, she's not able to be here today. She made some comments to it. But really, from what I was told and absorbed was that folks really want to see the integrity of the beach maintained the way it is. It's nice. You don't see hundreds of people using it. We want to keep open the public access where we can. And then there was some talk about whether or not to kind of keep open at the terminus of Gulf Beach Drive, whether or not we wanted to continue to allow parking down there, and kind of gone back and forth on that, but it does seem that that road is maintained by the county, and that it's the opinion of some folks that it should be accessed. It's the opinion of others that it should be shut off, but keeping in mind that it is a county road, that that is probably going to continue as it is. So those were kind of the biggest, I guess.
So I'll just ask, any comments about the general section, which are items 1 through 14? Yes.
There's one thing, I don't know if it's appropriate or not, but about a week ago, I found an active bald eagle nest back in the area. So it's around that back, what do you call it, Boggy, Jordan Bayou.
Right, okay.
It's back in there, so, like I said,
Do you have a data point for that?
I haven't gotten close enough. I don't want to disturb the birds. They're on the nest right now.
Okay.
But whether it's on Watkins property, which I believe it might be, or I'm told it is, but I don't know that for a fact.
So add it maybe to the list.
It might be worth adding it to the list.
All right. Thank you, sir.
Okay. Anything else in the general section?
So are you saying that the parking area we're saying is state on or county on, then what we're talking about now, a little?
We're going to talk about that when we get into the management. It's not really dealt with here in the general section. Okay, hearing nothing else in the general section, general information, the next area is natural and cultural resources. And again, that's 15 through 21. Josh, can you give us a little overview of that?
Yep, sure. So checked out with the master, State Historic Preservation Officer. They've done surveys in the area. I asked them to check it out. Nothing that they came up with. Let's see, so I don't have it printed out for you, but I have got an extensive Florida Natural Areas Inventory Report, so that's FNA. They're generally considered to be the state clearinghouse for all things species habitat. They did a site-specific report for us, and that's listed. But in general, I would say that, so not really many cultural resources, but natural resources, I would consider this to be a robust dune system with some uplands. And there's some really special plants out there, particularly Liatris provincialis, so it's one of your shooting stars that are really nice. So, and that's only found here and in Journey, or maybe Gulf County. So, Franklin-Wakulla, there you go. So, it's something that's worth preserving, and in keeping in mind public comments where we've said, let's limit the improvements, etc., I think that's in line with helping some of those special species be able to survive and propagate out there.
So, comments on this section? I have a hand here, here, here.
I just want to comment that I think the animals and the birds and the creatures were here long before we were, and it is our job to maintain their livelihood. So the minimal effort that we can put in, they don't need boardwalks, they don't need bathrooms. I mean, your house is right there. I totally support what has been said for keeping it natural and keeping it free from being destroyed.
Right.
Yes.
All right.
Yeah, you were
Okay,
good.
under B number 16, are there any buildings on the property that are 50 or more years old? That's not privately owned residence.
Correct. That would just be,
State land.
yeah, right, the state land.
Okay. Our house was built in 19...
Oh, right. I see where you're coming from, yeah.
I'm sure that
Yeah, several hours work.
Right. Yes.
My is similar, but this, where the bathrooms are now, what they call the new beach, that area where all the picnic areas are in the bathroom, I think that was built, and there's some people here that can correct me, in the early 60s. Does this not qualify?
No, ma'am, it's not located on the property itself, so it wouldn't be considered that.
So it's not state property then?
I believe that's county.
Right.
Yeah, it's Franklin
Yeah.
County.
The
Okay,
bathrooms are front.
Yeah.
okay.
Okay, the gentleman back there?
You mentioned the special plants that grow there. Is it envisioned for any placards with pictures and information to be promulgated down there by the parking area to let people know what they're looking at and what they need to keep their feet off from?
Yeah, it's a good point. So later on in the plan, there is, I don't have it right in front of me, but yes, so we would consider those to be interpretive signage, and if grant monies were available, that would be a really good use for some environmental education, and it would go a long way in helping folks identify it and know about the importance and how special they are to this area. And so the idea would be someone sees it, kind of learns about it, spreads that word to their neighbor, and right, exactly. So that is envisioned in it, but right now there's not necessarily funding for it, but as it becomes available, that's certainly something that would be beneficial to the area. Yes, sir.
Okay. Other comments on this section? Okay, obviously we've got the marshes and the wetlands, which is a little different area, is included here. No mineral resources, and anything on the marshes, no comments on the marshes. Really not doing much with those, yeah.
The only thing I guess I want to say is just the trash and the garbage in them. You know, and I don't know what you can do about all that. People dump them out of boats, throw them out of cars. Certainly makes it look bad.
Trash in and around the marsh.
Yeah.
So maybe there could be a partnership with local conservation group and doing some
awareness.
dedicated coastal cleanups and perhaps some awareness.
Earth Day is coming up, and that would be a really nice time to get a community group thing going. I tried to get, something was happening on Good Friday. REI was sponsoring a World Cleanup Day. I contacted several people for the City of Carrabelle. I'll get back to you, I'll get back to you. Nobody ever got back to me. I had 30 people that wanted to do trash pickup, and nobody said where we could go, how to do it, who to contact. It was a big letdown, but it would be a real important thing. I agree with her that the trash around is bad. We do a coastal cleanup once a year, an international coastal cleanup.
Who is we?
The volunteers.
We just walk around and pick up trash.
Yeah, we pick up trash.
I would just like to say, for the record, that there are people, private citizens, who work that beach every day from one end to the other, picking up trash. And
Especially
picking up
Michael.
trash out in the water.
Michael does it every day.
Without mentioning any names, there's all.
We're gonna mention it.
No. So everybody just needs to do their own part on a daily basis.
I'll move that, this was on the marsh section, but it needs to be kind of on the beach section. So, this is kind of the more perhaps controversial part, is the use of the property. And so Josh first, and then we'll hear from you. What are the kind of major changes that we made after the last workshop?
Right, so I had classified it as multiple use, but in discussing with some of the committee members earlier, I guess DEP actually considers conservation and resource-based recreation a single use. So that's going to be updated in subsequent versions to reflect that. So rather than having two uses, it would be single use of the property. And so what might that include is passive recreation, fishing, your typical activities that you would consider when you go to a state park. What do you do? Let's see. That was one of the big ones.
If you can refer to the numbers.
Yeah, sorry, yeah. So that was under numbers 24 and 25. We also had comments that maybe under number 23, that maybe we don't really want to advertise it so much. So we've got like folks flooding into the area. Maybe it's not the regional draw that's bringing visitors, but to have some sort of maybe a kiosk out there to inform folks some of the special features there. And then under number 28, we added specifically beach driving and unauthorized bonfires to that.
And just for your information, we noted that small warming fires by fishermen in October, November, and December are allowed by county ordinance. That might be something that people might want to talk to the county about.
For those that haven't been around the county for very long, that is traditional area down there, one for fishing, net fishing, and mullet fishing. Also, through the years, has been a good old party area for a lot of the local young folks, and the bonfires have been down there. As long as they're not up on the dunes anymore, should not be totally restricted.
So they're okay in the woods?
Yeah, out in the woods, that's right. But that's the kids' that's something else.
Yes.
What about fireworks?
I think it's in the legislature this year. I don't know what they're going to do about that, and whether it says anything specifically, but I know that there is legislation that's going moving forward.
Make them illegal?
No, make it legal.
Yeah, legal. Well, there are folks setting them up down there now. That's what I'm asking about.
Right, that's not legal.
Okay.
Our chief left, but that's my understanding.
Should we call the chiefs if people are setting off fireworks, or is it just the other?
Yeah, they were.
Because they leave trash
I know, they
everywhere.
leave all that
And
stuff.
money is too big enough.
I wasn't here the last meeting. Did you say?
You're welcome.
Did you say they were able to drive on the beach or not?
Oh,
You do, okay. I see four-wheelers sometimes, I walk a lot on the beach, and I do see people with four-wheelers and golf carts.
So the appropriate action.
Not a lot, but I do a lot in the
Sure.
summertime when renters sometimes bring them with them, I guess, and what's the law on that?
So I believe that's a local ordinance, and I believe that the local ordinance says no driving on the beach.
Okay, I see a
Been
lot
that
of
way
them.
for many years. It's state law, county law.
And then, you know, one day walking and 2 or 3 days, these renters are here maybe for a week, and by the end of the week, the beach is red.
And we were discussing how we might be able to inform folks about kind of who do you reach out to first to report some of those issues. It would be, I think we decided FWC first, and then split between Franklin County Sheriff and Carrabelle Police. And just let them know, don't approach the individual, just call and report it in.
I haven't said anything, but sometimes during the summer, it can get bad in the summer. Not all, not very often, but some of the renters bring them.
I'm not sure if this raises to a 911 thing, but the
No,
system is.
I haven't reported anything, it's just I wondered what the law was.
Yeah, here and then here.
Thank you.
The biggest problem is because you don't know who to call, because that's county, but the city is overseeing it, and then you got FWC, and it needs to kind of be a list of who's first, second, third.
So, I mean, we talked a little bit about this, but the dispatch system is that you call 911, and it seems like, oh, that should be a real emergency. But, you know, if people are breaking the law and, you know, there could be some danger to it, if you call 911, they decide, is that something that doesn't count? Or is that something we will, they let the sheriff know, they let the police know, they let FWC know, depending on, you know, what the call is.
Our sheriff's department also got a non-emergency phone number you can call, 911. You can call, get a dispatcher name, and 911.
Okay, so that's a good point to have. So it's 911 or a non-emergency.
If they have non-emergency call, 24 hours a day to get somebody.
Yes.
Yeah, you kind of skipped over a number of 23 here, and I think it's got the most important comment in the whole revision.
Okay.
And that's from Mark Curran over in the county, where he says that he does not believe that that the beach area that we're talking about in the Gulf Beach Drive should be promoted as a destination area, and that people should be directed to Carrabelle Beach County Park, a mile to the west. And I think that's something I heard a lot last time.
That's right, that's right. As far as the regional, oh, come see McKissack Beach because it's got all these endemic species that are real cool. So in that kind of line of thinking, not to advertise it, and that is a comment for the infrastructure that's already in place at Carrabelle Beach. That was his comment that we probably don't need restrooms if there is that within a half a mile of that access point already. And you're exactly right. Kind of echoing what you said is that we've consistently heard that we don't want to see public restrooms in or around the area.
One reason I don't want to see the restrooms, and I made an effort today to go and check out bathrooms through every area, and the one at the state park I went in, it smelled of course, but I feel like, I don't know if it's ever been vandalized, but I think it could cause vandalism. That's on the main highway, or 98, and this would be off the beaten path. But when I walked in, you know, the fixtures in there were nasty. It smelled, but it looked clean. But one of the toilets was running. I just lit off and repaired it, you know, put it back on. But how long has it been running? How long is that water? Maintenance is a big thing and stuff.
Sure, and that was another reason
That I think
why
we
to
don't.
not have it. Yes, ma'am.
Mine was just to say that in terms of the phone, let's get back to that issue, is why don't they just, if they're gonna put a sign up, just go ahead and put the phone numbers of who to call if you see there's an issue.
great idea.
Could somebody clarify the bonfire rules for Carrabelle Beach? I know St. George Island has theirs. Are they not allowed here? Do you need permission?
So, in this area, it's gray in that, from my understanding, that the fishermen approved fires in the months of October, November, and December, they're allowed to do for warming purposes. There's a lot of leeway in that law, and so sometimes certain fires might be larger than others. But that one is tough to touch because it's so specific to just this area.
So it's not like St. George where you can get a permit during certain months of the year. Anybody can have a bonfire. Like we have one every full moon. We dig a hole, we build a big fire. They can't go on during turtle nesting season, but the rest of the months, and it's very clearly labeled. Carrabelle is not like that, correct?
Not right now.
Okay.
No, ma'am, I don't believe so.
I don't want to go there and get caught and get in trouble. That's why I'm asking.
I should know this as much time as I've spent down here, but I don't see mention, and get to it, but, what is the policy on alcoholic beverages? We talked about litter and didn't talk about alcoholic beverages, and my experience is the two often go hand in hand.
Sure, I honestly haven't considered that. I would probably say, what would the de facto Franklin County ordinance, and I think that as long as it's not glass, that it's permissible on the beach.
I think at the park there are signs that say not.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Okay, but we're gonna check that out, and there should be something in the plan that makes that clear.
I just got one clarification. We're gonna leave, I'm gonna call it the old beach, that's what we call it. Well, it used to be our beach, the old beach. Them old tables that roped off, that used to be the park when I was growing up. We're gonna leave that as an access way to the beach down there at the end of that Duff Drive.
Yes.
Okay. I just want to clear it up.
Are you gonna level it back up?
It's got some holes in it.
So,
Yeah, we went down today and there are really bad holes, mud puddles in the parking area.
So a little further along in the plan, there's an improvement section under section D, and that would be specifically number 2. That would be where that's addressed.
So that's where we're going next, and that may be very soon, but let's just see, we're looking at, what is this, 22 through 32, I think. Any other comments on what we have, 22 to 32? And then we'll go on to the next one. Okay. Again, if you have something, you can email Josh and call him, whatever, and but let's now go on to D, management activities. Again, I'll ask Josh for, what is it that are the major changes, and then we'll get comments from the audience.
Right, so and it looks like there's a little typo under 34. It says at this time restroom facilities are needed for or planned, so that would be are not needed or planned.
That's more than a little typo.
Okay, and what else, John?
The low impact recreation under number 35. And under 30, let's see, under 38.1, habitat restoration and improvement,
39.
or sorry, 39-1 rather. It was to allow the land to be maintained in its current state, and then we added or enhanced. So what sort of enhancements? Maybe some dune vegetation, plantings, could be, yeah, so various plant propagation, and then later on there's like removal of invasive and exotic species, so those kind of would go hand in hand together. So that'd be one of them. We added and discussed adding another measurable objective, which would be dune growth.
Natural dune
evolution. Or natural dune evolution. So whereas we might not go and dump 5 dump truck loads of sand out there to get the dune to grow, but just allow naturally that dune to build back up, and then maybe if the funds are in place and it seems acceptable, perhaps have some sort of dune crossover to allow the dune to continue to grow. Elevate it so that people aren't walking directly through that goat path that's there right now.
So, just to explain that a little bit, if you just let that dune go in the past, the county has graded sand out into the water. That would not happen anymore, and so that dune could get 10 feet or higher. It could also have a big storm and the water could build up behind it. It could wash open again. But the point would be the natural dune evolution means you don't try to fight it, you let it do what it's going to do. So I had a hand here, yes.
Yeah, I got an overlap between number 27 on the previous section and 33 on the management. I just want a clarification. Are you saying that you want to have a private entity look for revenues, or are we going to let the FWC and the Forestry Department and local police take care of it? Which one is it?
So you said 27 and?
27 on the last section, because it overlaps. You got 27, please provide potential for the private to generate revenues.
Right.
And how does that apply if we're going to have the forestry take care of the fires, police take care of the crime?
That's right. So, and we chatted about what might make sense. So could there be a, this is silly, but like a bake sale for improvements to the area? Can you get together local sponsorship or events to fundraise? We might want like a donation box at the end there. So some of those ideas, I don't think we really discussed much further. Whether or not the city would keep those and appropriate them into like a McKissack Beach Fund, that certainly could be an option.
Another option we talked about was there could be a Friends of McKissack Beach organization that would kind of raise some funds, have volunteers. For example, if we want to have a kiosk with some signs about how to take care of your dog and what plants to look out for and so forth, rules on nesting birds and stuff. All that stuff costs money, and so you might raise money for those signs, and you might get some volunteers who would put them in. That could be just totally done on volunteer. You could have a friends group. Part of this will be having a steering committee that's trying to coordinate these things. So that's going to be. Does that? I want to get you your hand, but does that answer your question?
I just wanted to make sure you weren't going to be hiring a private manager to run the place. We have to pay salaries, medical care.
Sure. And in it, there is reference to, do you consider a private land manager? That's just because the statute has to have us flesh that out.
And one question also. Okay, we're making this big plan. Is there any rule in here that we have to implement any of it?
Not to my knowledge, no. However, having these in the plan, if funding were to come about for maybe some plantings, doing walkovers, environmental education, you can point to this document and say, this mechanism and framework has been publicly vetted, has been accepted, and that'll give you a little more oomph when you're making those money asks.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
She actually had her hand up first, and then you're next. Yeah.
I just wanted to say in reference to, we were talking about plantings and things on the beach, but what about people who actually go to the beach and start raking the seaweed and moving it and burying it and all that kind of stuff? I mean, that's on public, McKissack Beach land. I mean, from my understanding, they shouldn't be doing that. I mean, if they want to do it on their own property, that's fine, but to go onto the public beach and rake it for their own particular area for their guests or whatever, is that?
I don't know how that is specifically managed here, and part of that complication is because it's not technically considered a beach for regulatory purposes. I know in other areas of the state you have to have a beach raking permit to rake the rack, so that the seaweed and stuff you see that washes up on shore, that's called rack. So that rack line, if it's in front of a resort, they've got a permit and someone comes out there with an ATV and scrapes it up. I don't know how that is addressed in at McKissack Beach. I'm not sure.
I don't know.
We should not encourage that whatsoever. By raking that is that's a vital feeding source for a lot of birds. When the wood washes up and creates piles, that's ugly. Well, that's what creates the dunes. That's what catches the sand and rebuilds the dunes at no cost to anybody. That's just how Mother Nature does things. So we should never do anything to encourage any kind of rack raking or removal of strip wood.
So Paul, was that enforceable now?
That's the easiest of Paul right there. I don't know what the law says about that.
Okay, this gentleman has been very patient, and it's now his turn.
Those my patients. I'm kind of concerned about this definition of revenue and income. Does it include grants? Grants. Like the one that revised Marine Street and had a title and it excluded all the shrimp boats from our harbor, like that.
Yeah. So right now there's no real funding source for the actual management of the beach. And I believe the idea is that just to promote that as those funds become available to seek them. Does that kind of answer the question?
Almost, because it gets the grants that are encouraged and submitted, and they go completely by what the public has to say, even the typos go by the public. And maybe next time, our houses are going to be the shrimp boats.
So, dangerous territory to get into, but I think the idea of the plan is kind of a protection for you. And in other words, if this plan says no restrooms, then you can't go get a grant to put restrooms there.
But
if it says,
okay, we got a campground.
Right. No, we probably need to say no camping in the plan. So if that's something you don't want to have happen, then you probably want that. And one of the things that's going to come up here shortly is the idea of a walkover.
About no grants.
Huh?
No grants.
No, they can't afford it.
Well, I think the city, probably needs some help on various things. To say no grants is, I'm not sure that's something that they would want to do. Yes.
I would say that whenever, from my experience, whenever we submit for grants or a grant comes open, it's discussed in the public business here within these chambers, and it's explained very well. It's not something that's done behind the scenes, at least since I've been on board
We're in
here.
Franklin County, we're not in the city of Carrabelle.
But we advertise that, we advertise when that's happening, when that's listed on our agenda. And when, you know, so it's public information when we're applying for grants, and we discuss that here in the public. What are the caveats of the requirements of the grants? And the city taxpayers cannot afford to maintain that property or to put improvements out there, just as we have to have grants to maintain our roadways or to do any major improvements in the city limits. We also need grant funding to make improvements on that property out there as well. The taxpayers, we're not a wealthy community.
Stop the management at the city line now.
Well, at this point, the basis of this whole thing is that this land may be in the county and not in the city boundaries, but it is leased by the city, so the city is responsible for the management of this through their lease they have with DEP, the state DEP, State Lands Division.
And then I would like to just follow up on that. When the city took the lease in 2008, it was required at that time for the city to develop a land management plan. And the city has never had funds to develop a land management plan. And we have submitted for a request for funding 2 or 3 times over those years. And finally, we received funding, I guess it was last spring or last summer sometime. The DEP granted $75,000 to develop this management plan. Otherwise, we would not be here this evening. We would still be without a management plan. And the management plan is really needed because, just as I believe it was Josh that explained, then when we go out for funding, we can say that it's in the management plan. It's very difficult to get funding for anything. Your airport, your port, your roadways. If you don't have a capital projects plan or a land management plan like this, then you can apply for the items that are in the plan. It's hard to get funding for items that are not in the plan. I do not foresee in the near future that the City of Carrabelle will ever be able to afford to do major improvements out there on that property without state assistance.
Okay, I have a hand here. Yes?
This kind of ties into what the mayor's talking about. Okay, so we got the money, and I know that we're not obligated, or something was said earlier, to do anything in this plan. Here's my question. Is there a term on this plan? Does it have to be reviewed periodically? And if it were to be, we wanted to change anything in it, what would be the process? I presume it would go through the city commission, but what would be that process? Is it done on a periodic basis or any time that it should come up?
Right, yeah, so typically these are revised every 10 years, so once the initial plan is in place, so this would be the initial plan, it has the ability to do a total revamp after your 10 years. It might be holding additional public meetings, another steering committee, and saying, oh, well, we didn't build a dune walk over this past time. Does it still make sense to? How might we do things differently? So that would be where you get into more of your adaptive management. So things didn't work. We think that this might be a better direction for us to go. That's when you would do your rewrite.
Is it mandatory though? Because we may not.
State law, it is mandatory to do an update every 10 years. But hopefully, once you've got this in place, it'll be a lot easier to update and change, and then resubmit to the state and be in compliance with state statute. And I think that there is, I would have to double check the statute, but I think that if there is a mechanism where you don't have to wait until your 10 years, that if you need to make revisions, you are able to do that, submit it to the Department of State Lands, they take it to the Board of Trustees, it's voted, incorporated, and updated.
So there is an amendment process, but then we're also, there's going to be a steering committee. So if there's a question of, well, what should be on the signs that you're putting out there, you don't have to amend the plan in order to decide on what language is going on the signs. You know, that can go to an agency that's responsible. If there's any concerns or controversy about it, we can go to the steering committee. That can be open to input.
I'm sorry. Last time we kind of introduced ourselves, and I just asked Liz who the young lady is up front, and I don't know who it is. Could we kind of do that one more time to know who everybody is here and why they are a part of this?
I think that'll take a long time, but maybe what we'll do from now on, why don't we say, anybody who's speaking, just say who you are.
Can I ask who the lady is up front with dark blue on?
Who are you?
I am flattered, okay? My name is Robin Broga. My son, who's 32 years old, learned to ski in front of McKissack Beach.
Awesome.
And my first time I was ever in a kayak, which that's my business now, I do eco tours,
Okay.
was the first time I was ever in a kayak was at McKissack Beach. So it's very near and dear, and I've followed it for a long time.
Good. That makes me feel good. Now I know what your heart is.
Yes.
Okay. Other questions on this right now? Yeah.
I have a question. I apologize. My name is Shiloh. I live here in Carrabelle. It's more to you, Brendan, because I haven't been at a meeting. This $75,000 that is awarded, it was specifically gathered for the purposes of creating this plan?
Yes.
So that $75,000 will be used in the construction of the plan?
Yes, yes.
Okay. All the $75,000, there won't be any left to apply to the plan?
No, not to apply.
Is there a breakdown of what those charges, like what they went to?
Yes, there is.
Okay.
That's correct? You send a list of deliverables every, how often does he send the deliverables, a list?
That's right, and actually, I don't believe that we'll utilize the whole 74, because we had budgeted like 20,000 for improvements, and like had an architectural design firm do it, and it doesn't sound like people want many improvements, so we're not gonna hire a firm to do it.
Okay.
But periodically, the city is billed, and through the ARPC, they are handling the development of the land management plan, and periodically they will submit a bill to Ms. Courtney, which is paid, and then we submit to the FDEP for reimbursement.
And this is not because I disagree. I love the idea of having a plan in place to make improvements through the future. If the community decides we don't want a land management plan, what happens to the $75,000?
It's already developed. We've already paid some because they've been working on it. This is our last public workshop, and then they're going to do some revisions and submit it to staff to look at, and then the commission will have to review it and approve it, and then the DEP will have to review it and approve it. So
and then it goes to the governor's cabinet.
But also, the state requires us to have a plan, so we can't decide we don't want it.
That's what I want. That's what people were asking questions about. That. Okay. Thanks.
We're asking you right now, what do you want and what don't you want?
Right. The plan's happening and it's been paid for, so make the use best.
Right. And we used in the steering committee the word recommended. These things in the plan are recommended, but not, necessarily engraved in stone. So if there's something, as Mr. Taylor said, that we decide we want to do down the road, the public decides. If it's in the plan, we can submit for grant funding if available.
Okay.
I don't recall where I was. I think we might have been number 1. Maybe we can move on to number 2. Under goals, so public access and recreational opportunities. So ensure continued sustainable public access. So right now we've got to maintain the access points. So that's both the terminus of Gulf Beach Drive, as well as where property owners have been accessing the beach all along. So if we're going to keep it open to the public, and keep it open to the property owners that have continued to access In my mind, I see that as appropriate. And then we added one of the goals to be conserve dune habitat while allowing for public beach access. And then one of the measurable objectives that we spoke about was to develop plans for a dune walker or designated walking path at the terminus of Gulf Beach Drive. And I believe...
You want to take a look at that?
Yeah. We've got some ideas in the mix. So these are going to be some renderings to give you all an idea of what a dune walkover looks like. This has got a lot of switchbacks. Both of these are going to be ADA acceptable. These both follow DEP guidelines. You got your, the 5-foot walkway, your appropriate rise over your run for ADA compatibility. So this would be one instance of what it might look like. And the benefit to having a dune walkover would be to allow the dune to continue to accrete, to grow. And if there were a storm, it would allow it to move backwards and migrate. So you're not preventing the dune from growing there, and it's an option to elevate and get it over. This would be one option. The other option would look something like this. You lose a little bit on your access side on the right side of this picture. On the left also, it's best management practice to not go any more than, I believe, 10 feet along the vegetation line, so you don't want your walkover to be extended onto the beach. But this would allow for folks to access it and for the dune to close up. Right now there is no funding in place for it, but if we make reference in the plan and as the funding becomes available, these things could be implemented. I believe they run anywhere from like 7,000 to 8,000 on the low end to, let's just say, 15 on the upper end. They're designed to be frangible, so if a hurricane were to come, it's designed to be destroyed, and that's a dune walkover. Yes, ma'am.
Anybody, and I can't remember the property outline, but has there anybody determined whether that's in the right of way of that?
That's entirely dune and seaward, so it wouldn't infringe on the right of way.
So
Okay, the county
I've been a little confused in the way it was explained. You know the paved area out there. The paved area is county right of way. The next 50 feet after the pavement is still county right of way, but it's not paved. From that 50 feet on, which I think there's kind of an end of a fence line there that you can kind of see where that is, on for the rest of the parking area, that is all the state land.
Telephone pole, left as you go down, use that as you drive.
The telephone pole will kind of tell you where the state land starts. So that's, what we're looking at. Now, this is in the county jurisdiction. The state land is now leased by the city. And so, in terms of the maintaining of the parking, the county could agree, if they're out there grading that 50 feet, that they would, do additional work there. I think that they had done, grading the whole hole through the dune. DEP said, get out of here, we don't want you to do that. But that doesn't mean that they couldn't do that. But that's part of what this steering committee that includes representation from the county and the city and the agencies, are going to try to fine tune, that, who's going to be responsible for doing that. What you're doing here tonight is to say, did you like that walkover? Would you be, saying you like it doesn't mean you're going to get it, but if you really don't want to dune walk, And I think we've heard, there was a question, well, do you want to keep digging things out? No, I think the response it needs to be what we are now calling the natural dune evolution. What nature's going to do, it's going to be. Anybody object to that? Any comments on the idea of having a dune walkover? Yes.
I guess my only thought on the dune walkover is, have y'all ridden down there towards the beach? Have y'all gone down there and rode around and like it's just bump after bump after bump? We're gonna have this really nice dune walkover. Somebody needs to keep the driveway there too.
Yeah, the parking that I mentioned earlier is full.
Yeah, it's because, I mean, I took, my friend was here with me last time down there, and she goes, oh my God, you know, and so, in one sense, it's a distraction for people to come down there, but you have this nice, you're saying the city or the state will keep that up. I mean, let's don't put
Right.
something in nice and then have the.
So that would be directly underneath that, goal improve public access and safety, and that measurable objective would be a parking lot improvement. And an improvement doesn't mean pave it with asphalt. It might be fill it with a natural substrate that's able to drain and grade it, and then appropriate use of stormwater to help prevent some of that pooling. But that's again, it kind of goes back to funding and whether or not that can be influenced.
There was a gentleman who spoke at the city commission meeting last week. He worked for the county. He attempted to work on that parking area. He was threatened and frightened and told to leave, and the county said they would no longer, I don't want to say they said they would no longer do anything with that, but apparently that was the situation that greeted him as a county employee when he attempted to do the work on that parking area. I know that's not exactly in your ken, but it certainly has to do with the parking area. And I think that's very important. Apparently it was a local citizen down there who approached him in a very hostile manner, according to his story.
Did you get a picture?
The walkover, where would the parking be so you can use the walkover?
Where it is currently.
Right there.
Where it is currently.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't hear you. Okay.
We don't have to have a walkover though, and if that's not what we want, you would say that's not a priority, correct?
That's right.
Okay, if
I'd
we're
like to
going
take
to-
a few pros and cons, and then I'll get a sense of the audience. So,
If we're saying we want to do natural dune evolution and want to keep the beach as natural as possible, something like an entity like a dune walkover might not be what we want. It sounds like a lot of people feel like the money should go to something like, if we're talking priorities, better access to the beach.
but what I think part of what the recognition of having a dune walkover is, I think there's been an agreement that you want to retain community use and ability to access the beach there. And if you don't have the walkover, then you have people walking over.
Oh, you mean the indention that's the separation of
That's
the
right.
dune now? I understand.
So with the walkover would allow it just to naturally continue to build up. If people continue to access it, you've got a go path and a break in the dune, and if there's ever a storm surge, it's going to go there, blow it out, and
You study this, you do this a lot, correct?
yes, ma'am.
What's your recommendation?
A dune walkover would allow the dune to grow. Usually that's what.
Most beaches are there.
Yes.
Yeah, I know one thing we have talked about is a movie map. There was the other one.
So, yeah, so a Moby mat, Moby mats are a geotextile. They usually go on the ground. The Moby mat doesn't address the goat path there, but what it would do though is where the dune walkover or whatever, where it ended, you've got this mat that allows folks ADA accessibility to continue to go down to the beach. It's a way for you to get a whether it's a stroller, wheelchair, what have you, to be able to use your regular wheels and be able to go down to the beach. I didn't add that. Might we want to add bogey mats to that?
Yeah.
But there are issues with Moby mats, particularly sea turtle nesting. Sometimes when a turtle hits the mat, they could make them do a false crawl, so they don't actually go up the nest, they'll turn around and go back down. That's usually only an issue if you've got a mat that runs perpendicular to the beach, or parallel mats are less likely to interfere with sea turtle nesting.
We're talking about something perpendicular to the beach. It's the road down to the beach. That's perpendicular to the beach.
That's it. What I meant was you don't want it parallel. You don't want it running parallel because that's when they hit it. Sorry.
Okay, I've got a hand back here and then up here.
I'm Michael. I live here in Carrabelle. Well, what I would fear about this dune walkover is a kind of mindset that I almost think I hear. I see nothing in nature that man can't improve upon. And what you showed up, the picture you showed to me is a monstrosity. And it's totally unnecessary. A few people walk from those houses across the dunes to the beach. They're not doing any damage. But all that wood and railings and wheelchair access would do a lot of damage. And it's an eyesore too.
And I guess from what I've heard, the one contradiction to that, I think your clearly stated point of view, but just a few people walking over may not have a lot of damage, but it does have damage. Those plant communities are very sensitive, and we're not talking about a person or two a week. You could have on a weekend hundreds of people cross over and basically kill any plant that, and it takes years for those things to reestablish.
In the last 20 years, if anything, less people are using the beach than used to. And the shade produced by that monstrous dune walk that you showed, the first one, would do more damage than a few people walking on sand.
Right, and it was designed that way because it's ADA compatible and wouldn't be able to do one without it being compatible. The other option would be to demarcate a little bit better that path that's being used there. Maybe only have it 4 feet wide to at least kind of limit how much folks are using, to try to get it, them into that smaller path, if that makes sense.
You were next.
Regarding the Moby map, I'm sure everybody's used them on St. Vincent. I've been a turtler on St. Vincent for 16 years, so I well understand the issues with obstruction. But just what was just said, if you can encourage, and this has been effective somewhat on St. George, for them to use that same path. The other advantage would be, my husband's a firefighter, a retired firefighter, and emergency access, you may only need it once in 10 years, but it may be a life back where you need to get a stretcher out there on the beach. You don't have the appropriate vehicle in time or quickly enough. So I'm not arguing one point or the other, but that is another aspect of Moby mats.
That they do provide it, or
they do provide easier access than nothing in those situations. And they also direct traffic, so it actually there's less damage. It's relegated to one less damage overall, and the damage is relegated to a single area.
Yes.
Leah, could we pick the straight one rather than the zigzag one that's bigger? I mean, can we make an opinion about that and
Sure.
vote on it?
Sure.
The that's the issue, that the other one's so much bigger and wider. And you can get a wheelchair down the straight one.
And so the straight one was designed to be ADA also. Without actually doing design engineer drawings, it's hard to tell exactly, you know, your 4:1, whatever the ADA requirement is. It was more for illustrative purposes, and yeah, the switchback is ugly, but you know, those are just kind of to highlight the two options that are available. But whether we should have a vote on that, or maybe it would be addressed as funds were to become available and vetted at a commission meeting, a city commission meeting. I think that might make a little more sense than to have a vote right now. But it was just for illustrative purposes, just so everyone knows what the two types of designs might look like. Yes, sir.
One thing to think about, the young lady talked about access to the beach. If you do narrow it down where a vehicle can't get through there, you know, a four-wheel drive vehicle down, somebody was down on the point, they could rescue it, and they could drive down and rescue it. But if you narrow it down where a vehicle can't come through, you know, you eliminate that.
So in having discussions also with how might you get an emergency vehicle down there, I mean, I believe that access point is only a half a mile, and I say only half a mile, and seconds could mean life or death, but the other access could be right there at Carrabelle Beach. I mean, you can put in there and drive along the beach to get down to access that. If an emergency responder is coming from the west, that would be where they would hit first. If they were coming from Carrabelle, they might have to drive that extra bit and then cut down. But there is an access point there.
And then the chief did tell us that in our meeting earlier today that in an emergency they can go over private property to access an emergency.
That would be the other option, is to, instead of going down Gulf Beach, to kind of go along the upland and then down.
I guess I'm not understanding, but the spaces there, I know you're saying that it's breaking down the beach. Is that what I'm understanding?
Not breaking down the beach, but the dunes, and an intact dune provides protection against the storm surge.
Right, I understand.
If there's a weak point in it, that's where it's gonna erode away those dunes, and then you actually get pretty decent pooling of water behind there. So one of the issues, or one of the benefits to having the intact dune, would be the added protection against storm surge. Does that answer, or?
I guess. I've been here a long time, and I have seen storms just wipe dunes out, and I remember when there was dunes over St. George Island taller than this building.
Oh yeah, well, to be sure, the
So,
wind
I
energy
mean-
will wipe out the dune, but the energy expended on gnawing at the dune definitely slows down and reduces damages upland. I mean, it's not gonna. I mean, what did the dunes look like after Michael? Well, I mean, they were pretty much. But look at also how they've grown up, and it does provide protection to some of those local property owners there.
So, this is kind of a straw poll. And again, I don't think anybody wants the monstrosity version of the switchback ramps, but thinking that it could be a straight line version of a wood one. And again, the people talked about the Boggy maps, and basically what it is, it's 5-foot wide boards that have cables going through them that hold them together and create, and you just roll it over the dune, and if the dunes are building up or something around, or as hurricanes coming, you can roll them up and bring them back after the storm. So that's what that version is. But at this point, we aren't choosing
I don't know about boards, but yeah, it's a fabric.
Well,
or there's alternative
yeah,
versions.
there's a fabric version, and then there's the boards, you know, that are all laying next to each other, and there's a cable running through it that holds it. So I've seen both versions of that, the fabric or the other. But some kind of a dune walkover. I want you to give it a 3 if you think it's a great idea. I want you to give me a 2 if you think you could live with it, be okay, and 1 that you're opposed. And so I'm going to ask you to count that half of the room. I'll count this half of the room. How many people would give a dune walkover a 3? How many do you have? 2. Okay, so we have 19. How many would give a dune walkover a 2? Not great, but you could live with it. 5. How many are opposed to any dune walkover in any kind? 1, 2, 3. Let's hear from the people who have a concern or opposed, and is there anything that could be done? And again, the alternative is you're going to just have people walking over the sand and over the dune, and you know.
Do we not get we don't have a vote on the Moby map?
Huh?
You were lumping the Moby map and the dune walker together.
I was saying, not specifying a design, except that we aren't talking about the great big crisscross one. What would, tell us what, would you be okay with the Moby mat, but not the?
Yes, because the point is to try to make the dunes grow, and I think that if it needs to be deployed in some other location, it can be. I think it's lower cost and it's flexible.
Okay.
I think it's more practical.
So we may take another vote. Let's see what other people's concerns are and a way to address it. Here and then here, and then back there. Okay, go ahead.
I'm Robert. Been here since '01. I don't see a need for it because we've got a state park a half mile down. It has an access, you know, for emergency vehicles. And let's face it, we had one guy, Jim, that had a heart attack. He was way on down. They drove down and got him. But that was before they blocked off that area, but they still got the access. People cannot run a gurney or a stretcher on the beach. It's physically, you know, exhausting to them. They're not going to do it. So there will have to be a vehicle. And as far as putting a structure there, I'd rather it be natural. Because let's face it, every time we've seen 4 inches of rain in one day, all that washes out. It runs, the water runs down the sand road. I've seen it. It puddles there, and then of course when it builds up, it washes out. It's not going to be there long, because every, 4 or 5 years we have that. It washes out. Looks like a dozer went through there.
Other comment here?
I'm just uncomfortable with either choice being set in stone. I just don't think this is the accurate representation of what everybody believes. And could it just be notated that there were strong opinions on both, and if funds become available, they maybe readdress this or go to something else that was unanimous? There are people who have very, very strong feelings on both sides of this issue, and I don't know if taking a vote now and then it being implemented later, it seems inappropriate.
So we've got statements in here to say that we're trying to, have a natural dune, evolution. You can make that decision later, okay? That's a suggestion.
I would like the dunes to grow naturally, but I think we're making the assumption that everybody can walk to the beach, and at the moment,
at the new beach, there's no access if you're in a wheelchair or you have a walking stick. So if we had a Moby-Mat up there, I might feel differently about it at the old beach, but we don't have it either place at the moment for people who can't walk easily.
Okay, so there's concern about.
That's, I'm Rod, that area down there, if you put a walkover, you've got a very limited parking area at this point. You put a walkover there, you're going to impact what parking we've got down there. So far, like he said, that area turns into a lake on a heavy storm. And then the lake turns into a river and drains. But, and it's continuing to do that. And the people that use that area so far have managed to get across the dune opening and go both ways on it. I've been doing it for 30 years down there, one way or another. A crossover, walkover would be nice for a few folks, but you don't have many people down there that would have access to it, that need that. They want to go up, they go up to the park, county park, and it's the dune problem I fought for years, trying to keep people's vehicles off of those dunes. And unless you get good backup from local law enforcement, and like I said, you've got 3 agencies that may give you something, may, if they got somebody in the area and they think it's worthwhile because it's a misdemeanor. But a dune walkover is going to take away from what we've got down there. And they're called the old beach. It's natural. And that's what, it's great for photography, it's great for fishing, it's great for just sitting on your butt on the sand, and for wading. It's great for kids. Don't need to do anything other than to try to keep it as natural as it is. Thank you.
Okay.
I guess my thought with the dune walkover is that this is something we're thinking about, but we're thinking about it as well as we're thinking about getting some drainage in for that parking area. Like, that's another part of this plan, is trying to get that so that it's not a giant river. And we want the dune, I mean, at least I think that the general consensus is that we would like to be able to park there and see the dune be a well-established thing. And I feel like without having some form of walkover or a Moby-Mat or something to channel the people's footsteps, we're just going to be breaking down that dune. And again, like, it won't help for a major hurricane, but for a small, for a smaller storm, we may actually not flood that area, or we might see flooding, but it drains because we've added some sort of drainage. I don't know, I think that along with other things, the walkover could be a very good thing for the environment down there.
So, again, there's what goes in the plan, and I think the suggestion here was, some of these decisions need to be deferred. I think that what our ranking tells us is there's real division. If we'd done this and there was one person who was opposed and there was a solution that could have addressed that, then we'd have a decision. I would say we don't have a decision on that.
Good.
And that's, we're affirming the need for public access, which includes a handicap, but, that's all gonna have to get answered later on. Where I could put that in the plan. Is that okay with folks?
Could we put in the plan that, because I don't have a strong feeling about access at the old beach, but I think we do need access at the new beach. It's not there. And that's county of Southern Oklahoma.
Specify in the county beach, I think.
Because that would make a difference to what we did at the other one.
In other words, if the handicap accessibility was available someplace.
Yes, yes.
That, I mean, that's obviously should be kind of a concern for us. Even those of us who are able might not be tomorrow.
Well, that's why the voting was a bit tricky.
Yeah, yeah.
I guess if we do nothing at all, is there a possibility that we don't really need park, there's a way, I think the parking, the cars coming in and out is what's causing a lot of that washing too, because we're constantly beating that down and all that. So if we do nothing at all, that may be less parking right there and stuff. I think that's got to be
Some of us don't
addressed.
live there. Some of us need parking.
Right. Well, and small parking or create parking that's not gonna wash.
So
But I think a lot of that comes from the parking coming in there.
We haven't gotten kind of the design done, but I think what came out of the last meeting with the parking was that the parking has kind of kept it expanding, and so to the degree it can be moved back from the area in front of the private homes, that will be reduced, and we're working on a parking kind of plan so that there's a reasonable number of cars for people who don't live there can get there and can park and don't get stuck in holes. And now, if the dune kind of comes back, there's going to be days there's going to be water sitting there and you're going to park there anyway. But that's part of being part of a natural system. But other days that if the water can drain, that water will drain and there'll be, a place to park. But that's kind of, I think, where the plan is going at this point. Yeah.
One thing that Josh said that worried me a while ago was that he's gonna improve parking. I think our consensus is to improve existing parking.
That's
Anything,
correct.
anytime you use parking here, you ought to put the adjective existing in front of it.
So not to expand the area, but to
Define.
more clearly define parking. So like
Exactly.
maybe you have some angled parking here, perpendicular parking here, and maybe, let's say, 15 cars are what goes in there now. So just to keep it in place and give them an idea where they can position their cars.
But I heard something about saying, like, maybe shortening the space. Is that what you're saying?
I think there was a misconception that if you had the walkover, it would take space out of the parking area. I think the way the layout works, it would not take any parking space if you did the walkover. There's a way to do the walkover that would start, where the walk starts now in the parking area.
But you're not gonna move it back, the parking area,
No.
from where it is now?
No.
Okay.
Basically, it might narrow a little bit, but basically the same number of parking. And historically, the parking area was smaller than it is right now.
I'm afraid that if you narrow it too much, I was there today, that people won't be able to get in and out without running.
Right. We gotta make sure that people can get in and out.
Yes, from the way it was here a few years back.
Yeah.
Big difference.
There's a lot more parking than it is now.
Huh?
When we was teenagers, a lot more parking there then than what it is now.
Oh, then it is now. I heard that it was smaller.
No.
Okay.
You had a motel right up there, City or right from the motel.
Right. So there was parking there too.
And the park was up there too.
Okay.
I have one more thing. What I'm hearing from you is that there's not a walkover, you cannot protect the dune. Is that, if you don't put a walkover over,
area of the dune.
you're not gonna protect the dune. Is that, I mean,
I
if
think
people are
that
walking.
if you've got,
Yeah, if people are walking instead of, okay, gotcha.
it's going to, but, the walking might do it, take it out, but also if it ponds up and blows out, that's gonna, reopen the.
But obviously, a dune walkover is gonna protect the dune more than walking through it.
Yes.
I'm sorry, but I was a latecomer, this is all pretty new to me. I was in Quincy, Florida working and heard that there was plans to close the old beach to public access. Is that off the table?
That's all.
Great, thank you very much. Great.
That was never on the table.
Great.
Okay, do you have anything else to cover? Is our time?
Hydrological restoration, so just so number 3, I see that as the flooding issues that are present there. That might be able to be solved alongside the parking. Maybe if they're, you know, and I'm not a drainage engineer, but maybe some sand rather than the hard pan. That would be really expensive to go in there and dig out all the stuff that's there and then to backfill it with stuff. So keep in mind that would be you know, where we might want to utilize a grant opportunity there. Does anyone have any comment on that? So we'll go down to 4, sustainable forest management, and I think that we've got.
Let's just take. I mean, people have had a chance to look at this. We've emailed it out. You've had a chance to look at it here. It is 7 o'clock, and so that was the time we had set for the hand. Sure people, at least some people didn't have dinner yet. Want to leave. So I just want to say, is there anything else that you want to say before you leave? Yes.
Yes, sir. The only concern I would have with the dune building up has been brought up. It is the water, and there'd have to be some kind of management of that water to make any of this feasible down there. You're going to have some kind of a plan to manage that water.
And obviously, it's sand. You know,
it'll eventually soak up, but it may be a few days.
It may be a day or 3 days sure. At the most, depending on how much water and how deep it is. So that's one way to deal with the water. And you know, it just might mean that you don't go out to the beach that day or that area. You can drive to Carrabelle Beach and walk down. Yeah.
I was just gonna say, the thing with walkover, what concerns me is just like Carrabelle Beach has had, the public beach has had ramps and all this, it always gets washed out. Yeah. You know, that's why there's not one now. And then you see like the place down here that they built, Elf Court, and it's an eyesore now, you know, and nothing's been done to it since the hurricane, and it still looks like crap, and I just don't want to see that happen to Carrabelle Beach, because God has a way of fixing things back where we mess it up. So.
Okay, last comment?
I'm sorry, I am just concerned, a lot of people left early in the meeting when it was pretty much unanimously decided that what people had agreed at the last meeting was that as little would be done as possible, and that they wanted to preserve what was already there. This issue of a walkover seems to be completely in opposition of that, and a lot of those people are no longer present. I just want to bring that up.
Yeah, okay. I meant that's a fair observation. So I think we recognize that there are people who like the idea of a walkover, who are opposed to it, and you know, keeping it natural and letting the dune come back. You know, the walkover has good things about it and bad things about it. It will help restore the dunes, but it also affects the dunes. So it's a balancing thing, and there's not consensus on it, and that will have to be decided later. Yes.
If there are recommendations in this plan for the hydrological management of the parking area, it would then be possible to take this plan to the county, whose parking area and land that is, and encourage them to make some positive steps. So this plan could be very helpful in that regard.
And again, they own up to the parking area.
County
not
maintains
the
the
parking area.
Yes, they do.
Not even
So, I really appreciate everybody's input. You're willing to listen to each other. help us capture your insights, and we will do the best possible to honor what you said and balance these different.
The parking is in the state lands. Parking is.
The county maintains the road.